an emergency migration bill, but losing one of his closest colleagues. The questions over his grip on his party tonight.
I'm sorry that Robert Jenrick has resigned. He was a good minister.
Robert Jenrick's resignation follows this former Home Secretary's warning that the government faces electoral oblivion if it doesn't fully stop the boats. Also tonight, Boris Johnson takes personal responsibility for decisions and failures over COVID and admits he didn't hear a sufficient klaxon of alarm.
I understand the feelings of these victims and their families, and I am deeply sorry for the pain and the loss and the suffering of those victims.
They're scared and desperate. The warning from the UN after looting at one of its Gaza aid centres. One step closer to justice, the government promises to study new evidence on the pregnancy drug Primodos, highlighted by Sky News. One she'll want to hold on to, not shake off, why Taylor Swift is joining presidents and prime ministers in winning a prestigious award. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. It is, you suspect, something of an understatement. Rishi Sunak said tonight the resignation of a minister who until recently was seen as one of his most loyal was disappointing. Robert Jenrick quit as immigration minister after the publication of emergency legislation to tighten up the law around the deportation of illegal migrants to Rwanda. He said it didn't go far enough, and he isn't alone. His former boss, Suella Braverman, warned the Conservatives faced electoral oblivion if the bill fails. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, reports.
Walking into trouble.
Can your Rwanda plan be saved, Prime Minister? Are you ready for a rebellion from your own MPs?
A revolt bigger than he ever expected because of this. The Prime Minister and James Cleverly publishing emergency legislation to get the planes to Rwanda off the ground.
Decision makers, which both the Home Secretary and immigration officers and the courts must all treat Rwanda as a safe country.
He says that international human rights law won't be able to stop people being sent to Rwanda.
Where the European Court of Human Rights indicates an interim measure relating to the intended removal of someone to Rwanda under or purportedly under a provision of immigration acts, a minister of the Crown alone, and not a court or tribunal, will decide whether the United Kingdom will comply with those interim measures.
The opposition scathing.
Well, this is total chaos in the government and in the Conservative Party. This is the desperate, dying days of a party ripping itself apart. Yeah.
But Robert Jenrick, the man charged with selling this legislation to the party, tonight walking away from government. Once one of Rishi Sunak's closest political friends, Jenrick promised hardline MPs he'd quit if the bill wasn't tough enough. In his resignation statement, he said, "I am unable to take the currently proposed legislation through the Commons as I do not believe it provides us with the best possible chance of success. A bill of the kind you are proposing is a triumph of hope over experience. The stakes for the country are too high for us not to pursue the stronger protections required to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges which risks paralysing the scheme and negating its intended deterrent." Earlier, this warning from his former boss.
It is now or never. The Conservative Party faces electoral oblivion in a matter of months if we introduce yet another bill destined to fail.
On a visit to Washington, Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, tried to paper over growing cracks.
I'm sorry that Robert Jenrick has resigned. He was a good minister. Nobody wants lots of people to be flown to Rwanda. As soon as that policy is in place, I think the number of people coming across the channel in boats will radically reduce.
After the resignation of Robert Jenrick, the question now is, how far does this rebellion spread? Every single Tory MP is being asked to make a choice within days. Do they back this new immigration legislation? Do they support the Prime Minister? But Rishi Sunak, he doesn't have a choice. He can only double down, raise the stakes, even threaten an election if MPs vote against him. But even that isn't guaranteed to work.
Such little goodwill. This will be decided in days, with critical votes next week. There will be more surprises. Sam Coates, Sky News.
Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is in Downing Street tonight. So, Beth, what is the potential impact of this, then, on the government tonight?
Well, Anna, if you want a sense of how dire the situation is for the man that lives behind me, think of it like this. He published his emergency legislation. He went to see his backbenchers and said that this was a unite or die plea, that the party had to get behind it and him or die. And then shortly after that, the man that should have driven it through Parliament, his immigration minister, resigned, triggering a civil war in his parliamentary party. So that is the backdrop of what the Prime Minister, who knew this was a gamble, is now facing. Now, the question is, how bad is it? How far might this rebellion spread? And I think a lot of that depends on what the Prime Minister can do between now and next Tuesday, when we think that there will be the first reading of this bill, to try and talk down some of the potential rebels and make the legal arguments. Because his argument in the letter to Robert Jenrick was that you have fundamentally misunderstood the position, that this is legally watertight and this will work. Now, Jenrick was unconvinced. His job now is to try and convince others on the right wing of the party. But to put the precariousness of this into context, there are, I'm told, by one right-winger, not necessarily in this camp, but saying that there are about 30 MPs that are coalescing around Braverman and now Jenrick. Now, if they all vote against the Prime Minister, that would be enough to sink the bill. So I think that the way I would characterise it is this is a bill that a Prime Minister who himself said this was a moment of survival or death cannot afford to lose. Failure to win on this will kill off any semblance he had of authority over his party. And I think it will also raise questions about the future of his leadership. So this undoubtedly the biggest moment yet of Rishi Sunak's premiership.
Beth, live for us there in Downing Street. Thank you. Now, Boris Johnson's appearance before the COVID inquiry has been anticipated for weeks, and his remarks there today suggested he understood the weight and expectations upon him. Mr Johnson apologised, saying he was deeply sorry for the pain and the loss and the suffering during the pandemic, an apology that was interrupted by protests. The former PM said he was really rattled by seeing the outbreaks in Italy in early 2020, admitting that he should have twigged much sooner how serious the virus was. And Mr Johnson told the inquiry that he takes personal responsibility for all of the decisions made during the pandemic. Well, we heard from her a moment ago on tonight's dramatic developments at Westminster, but earlier Beth Rigby was at the COVID inquiry, a warning her report contains flash photography.
You're going to apologise to the bereaved families, Mr Johnson?
A pivotal moment for this former Prime Minister. Boris Johnson arriving at the COVID inquiry before dawn, perhaps to prepare or rather avoid the families of those who died.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Here to give his account of his role in a once-in-a-century crisis, beginning with an apology Johnson almost instantly derailed.
Can I just say how glad I am to be at this inquiry, and how sorry I am for the pain and the loss and the suffering
sit down.
Of
please stop.
COVID
Johnson.
victims.
Please sit down. Please sit down, or I'm afraid you'll have to leave the hearing room.
4 protesters ejected from the inquiry, leaving Casey Hugo Keith to ask the questions families want answered.
Do you accept that overall the government decision-making, not the pandemic, but the government decision-making in response, led materially to there being a greater number of excess deaths?
I can't give you the answer to that question. I'm not sure.
Johnson didn't want to say whether his decisions added to the death toll, but he did admit his government did not take the threat posed by COVID seriously enough.
I think that it would certainly be fair to say of me, the entire Whitehall establishment, scientific community included, our advisors included, that we underestimated the scale and the pace of the challenge.
Part of that failure down to him. Boris Johnson missing 5 emergency Cobra meetings in early 2020, sending his health secretary instead. Evidence presented too that the PM didn't take warning signs from scientists seriously enough, be that over the speed of transmission or COVID's deadliness.
If we had collectively stopped to think about the mathematical implications of some of the forecasts that were being made, and we believed them, we might have operated differently.
But this not his fault alone.
I think collectively in Whitehall, there was not a sufficient, loud enough klaxon of alarm.
And after weeks of criticism around Boris Johnson's toxic culture in Number 10, today a defence of his leadership.
COVID kept coming at us in waves after wave, and it was very, very hard to fight it, and people were doing their level best.
Do you want to apologise to these families, Mr Johnson?
Have you learned anything, Mr Johnson?
A swift exit for the former PM, certainly not leaving today's questioning unscathed. From top officials to his closest aides, testimony after testimony at the COVID inquiry paints a picture of a Prime Minister ill-equipped to deal with a pandemic. Well, today Boris Johnson batted off those criticisms, insisting that mistakes made were the fault of a collective Whitehall machine rather than the man at the top. But whatever he says, the evidence is clear that there were failures of leadership, be that a failure to understand the seriousness of the pandemic in early 2020 to prevarications over lockdowns. Evidence today doesn't cast anyone around here in a good light, least of all Boris Johnson. And tomorrow he faces questions not just from lawyers, but from families directly affected by the decisions he made. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
As we heard, the former Prime Minister began giving his evidence today by saying sorry to bereaved families. But for many of those who lost loved ones to COVID, it wasn't enough. Our People and Politics correspondent, Nick Martin, spoke to one of them, Charlie Williams, who lost his father.
Absolutely could not miss this day. I want to hear what Boris Johnson has to say to families like mine. My name's Charlie Williams. My father is Vernute Williams, known as Rex. My father came over here, part of the Windrush generation, came in the 50s, worked hard all his life here.
Charlie's father died in a care home during the pandemic. He blames the government. He blames Boris Johnson. They queued early in the cold. Most had travelled far to be here. The bereaved, their grief laid out for all to see. Well, this is one of the big moments that Charlie and the other families have been waiting for, a chance to hear from Boris Johnson, questioned before this inquiry about his government's controversial handling of the pandemic. With the inquiry underway, Mr Johnson said he was sorry for their pain and loss. Mistakes may have been made, he said. The dark days of the pandemic condensed to just a few hours of evidence. I just wanted your initial reaction to it.
Jesus, where'd you start? You know, we can all make mistakes, but this is a man that goes beyond all of that. This is why my father's not with us today. Through these government decisions, you know, despicable decisions.
Do you have any sympathy for the idea that the government was in the thick of a crisis and that mistakes were made?
I can understand we was in an absolute crisis, that, you know, the country was on its knees. And they made that decision to let COVID-positive patients in our care homes. Anyone with an ounce of common sense would know what the result was going to be. So it's not a mistake, it was more of a sacrifice. I think he's going to jump straight in and shoot off. in the exact same way that he arrived there.
What do you think?
Complete coward. Complete coward.
For Charlie, this was about seeing Boris Johnson held to account. But the grief still runs deep. Nick Martin, Sky News.
And a reminder that we will have full coverage of Boris Johnson's second day at the COVID inquiry all day tomorrow on Sky News. It is evident, says the United Nations, that civil order in Gaza is breaking down. The looting of one of its aid distribution centres in the territory. Well, the area where civilians can seek safety has shrunk further as Israeli troops move into the south, starting to encircle the city of Khan Yunis. Gazans have been urged to head to a select number of Israeli designated safe zones, shown here in red, including the barren area of Al-Mawasi on the coast. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
More and more people are fleeing to Al-Mawasi in the south of Gaza with the promise of safety that they simply don't believe. Anything that can be scavenged is used for shelters. The UN says it has run out of tents. The war in Gaza is edging closer to Al-Mawasi. The smokes from airstrikes now not far away.
My brother was killed. He left behind a child and a pregnant wife.
Why can't they solve this war? Are we beasts? We are not beasts. Look at all these children.
The Israeli military is now operating in the centre of Khan Yunis, Gaza's second largest city. They believe Hamas's senior leaders are hiding underground. But the city is crowded with civilians, and the risk of killing innocent people is high. The Israeli military dropped thousands of leaflets again over Khan Yunis today. Printed on them was a Star of David and a verse from the Quran about a flood coming to punish the wicked. Despite asking them, the Israeli military won't tell us what the messaging meant. Civil order is already breaking down in Gaza. A United Nations warehouse in Khan Yunis was looted. The UN says the situation is now apocalyptic.
The Gaza border is a mile from here. This is about as close as you can get. The city of Khan Yunis is directly over there, and that's become the epicenter of the war now. And in the couple of hours that we've spent here, there's been a constant sound of attack helicopters, fighter jets, drones overhead, and Israeli artillery pummeling the city.
In Nir Oz, a kibbutz on the Gaza border, they're still sifting through the ashes to find body parts of people killed on October the 7th. They are looking for teeth, bits of bone, or flesh. It is slow work, but one soldier told me they'd found a lot. 30 people from this kibbutz are still being kept hostage inside Gaza, including Oded Moses' father. His mother has been released.
We must say what we are offering in order to end it or in order to release people, and what we are willing to pay. And if Hamas won't agree, okay, they won't agree, but we must push to negotiations. Currently, there are no talks.
Tomorrow marks 2 months since the Hamas attacks. On both sides of a metal fence that was supposed to keep the two sides apart, they are still living their nightmares. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, on the Israel-Gaza border.
We heard earlier Lord Cameron on the challenge facing Rishi Sunak over migration and his resigning minister tonight. The former Prime Minister was speaking to us in Washington, where he said the special relationship between America and the UK will endure whoever wins next year's US presidential election. Well, Lord Cameron was speaking to my colleague Wilf Frost. Wilf.
Anna, yes, indeed. It's actually Lord Cameron's first trip to the US since he became Foreign Secretary. And I caught up with him a couple of hours ago on Capitol Hill, where top of his agenda was trying to convince a small but very important group of Republican lawmakers to back more funding for Ukraine. It is, in fact, something that doesn't look likely to happen, at least in the short term. And given that, I asked Lord Cameron whether the US was still a reliable partner for the UK and Europe.
They are an extraordinary partner for us, and we've seen that whether we were fighting against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, all the struggles that we've been involved in, they are indispensable in that way. But I think you have to respect the fact, in Congress, the House is controlled by one party, the Senate is controlled by another. There's definitely a majority in here to back Ukraine, but it's made more complicated by the politics. And so you've just got to find that majority and get it through and get that money and get those weapons to the Ukrainians who so badly need them.
If you hear from Republican lawmakers here that the practical way out is a negotiated solution, Putin keeping some of the land he seized in 2014, what will you tell them?
Well, what I say to them is, look, of course, one day we have to, help bring this to an end. But right now, the task is to support Ukraine, to help them in this fight, to help them through the winter. And what I've been saying to them is, stand back and look at the Ukrainian success. They've pushed the Russians back across the Black Sea. They've opened a maritime route for trade, so they're trading and exporting again, and their economy is growing again. It shouldn't be for us to say to the Ukrainians, now is the time to make this proposal or that proposal. Right now, what we've got to do is back them.
I wanted to move on to the Middle East. And then a couple of days ago, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, too many innocent civilians have died in Gaza. Do you think Israel needs to be more discriminate in what it's doing?
We've said right from the start and have said continually that, look, we back Israel's right to defend itself, to go after Hamas. This is a murderous terrorist organization. I saw for myself the terrible things that they did on October the 7th. But we have said that, Israel has to have a regard for civilian life. They have to obey international humanitarian law, and specifically as they started in the south, not to repeat the tactics in the north. We've made those points just as the Americans have, and we'll continue to do so. But fundamentally, I would make the point that of course, we want to see pauses so that aid can get in and hostages can get out. But if you look at it from Israel's point of view, or in fact the world's point of view, if you stop this and Hamas is still in control of part of Gaza, there can't be the long-term solution that we want. This is a murderous terrorist organization that wants to kill as many people as it can, that doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist, and it can't possibly be a partner for peace.
Now, on China, Cameron acknowledged that things have changed since I was Prime Minister. I asked him if he was uncomfortable pressing his counterparts now he has to take a tougher stance given his past political friendships and past business relationships. He said it's useful to have his connections, better to have his relationships, and he is comfortable pushing where necessary. Of course, he described his phone call with his Chinese counterpart yesterday as constructive. And today he was meeting lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Tomorrow, it's to the State Department to meet his counterpart, Secretary Blinken.
Wolf, live for us there in Washington. Thank you. The Prime Minister has told the relatives of 97 Liverpool fans who died at Hillsborough that he was profoundly sorry. But the government will not be introducing a new so-called Hillsborough law, which would make it illegal for public officials to mislead official investigations. Las Vegas police have said a suspect was found dead as officers responded to an active gunman and reports of at least 3 victims at the University of Nevada. They added that there is no further threat and the motive is as yet unknown. The government has tonight agreed to look at a new study which claims to reveal how the pregnancy drug Primodos causes birth malformations. It follows a meeting with campaigners and information about the study provided by Sky News. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, who first reported on the impact of Primodos 11 years ago, has this on the latest development.
Earlier this year, a judge decided a group of over 100 claimants didn't have evidence nor the resources to prove that a pregnancy test drug called Primodos caused malformations to babies. Now, just months after that case collapsed, a new study's been published. A leading researcher in Sweden has spent 2 years compiling evidence concluding the drug does cause malformations. Professor Danielson says Primodos could have the same effect as the morning after pill in women with low progesterone levels when pregnant. effectively causing a failed miscarriage, which could damage the embryo's development.
When that happens, that also tells you what type of malformations you could get. So if it's early on, it could be more severe. For example, an amputation of the arm. Later on, it's more the branches of the latest developed vessels.
Alleged Primodos victims have a range of malformations. Campaigners argue there had been early warnings about the drug, but regulators failed to take it off the market. The government and manufacturer have always maintained the evidence is not conclusive.
Sky News has told the Women's Health Minister, Maria Caulfield, about this study, and she has agreed to look at it. A group of MPs who support the campaigners, including the former Prime Minister Theresa May, were in a meeting about Primodos, and they have urged the minister for a quick response.
Back in 1970, Marie Lyon used Primodos, and her daughter Sarah was born with a shortened arm. As head of the campaign group, she was at today's meeting in Parliament.
And you've only 350 families left. We're all in our 70s. It's about time that they actually went to the Treasury and said, right, let's get something sorted for these people to make sure that they can live the rest of their lives in a relatively comfortable state so that they're not having to pay for extra care, to pay for adaptations.
German manufacturer Bayer maintains that no significant new scientific knowledge has been produced that would call into question the assessment of an expert working group study published in 2017, suggesting no link between Primodos and congenital anomalies. But that study was criticised in the Swedish report, and families say time is running out for the government to consider and act on these new revelations. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, finally, she is hardly someone who needs another accolade, but to add to her musical records and a world tour credited with boosting the economies in every city she visits, Taylor Swift has now been named Time magazine's Person of the Year. The 33-year-old singer said of the award, "This is the proudest and happiest I've ever felt." Sky's Martha Kellner reports now from Los Angeles.
It's an accolade previously awarded to the late Queen, to President Barack Obama, and those who fought Ebola on the front line. So who would Time magazine pick as their Person of the Year for 2023?
The 2023 Time Person of the Year is Taylor Swift.
Okay, Taylor Swift.
It was the year her worldwide Eras tour made billions.
How does that sound?
She boosted tourism wherever she played, an example of so-called Swiftonomics in action.
Picking one person who represents the 8 billion people on the planet is no easy task. But we picked a choice, someone who represents joy, someone who's bringing light to the world. At least in 2023, she was like the weather. She was everywhere.
Swift is also now an academic subject. A new class on her career is being taught at Harvard University.
She fills stadiums. She causes traffic jams. She fills up the pop charts. She changes the way that streaming services, which are the major way we hear music, operate. She is someone who can influence the economic choices and the other choices made by a non-trivial slice of the population. I'm happy to see her be Person of the Year. As you know, nothing bad's going to come of that.
Some believe her influence is such that she could sway next year's presidential election too. Taylor Swift isn't just a pop star. She is now in her Person of the Year era. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Los Angeles.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Welcome to both of you. And among the stories, we'll be discussing the Guardian's take on tonight's political events, which says the Tories are in turmoil as the immigration, Robert Jenrick, quits over the Rwanda bill. Plenty to discuss. Back in a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. The Prime Minister introduces an emergency migration bill but loses one of his closest colleagues as questions mount over his grip on his party. Boris Johnson has taken personal responsibility for decisions and failures over COVID and admits he didn't hear a sufficient klaxon of alarm. And a warning from the United Nations after looting at one of its Gaza aid centres. Well, hello there. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Welcome to both of you. So let's see the front pages then. Let's start with The Times. Looks at Robert Jenrick's resignation over new laws designed to save the government's Rwanda plan as he says it is doomed. The Eye reporting on that story too. Jenrick quits, the paper says. Also dominating the front of the Financial Times. The Guardian says Tories are in turmoil following the resignation, adding that the former minister may be positioning for a right-wing rebellion. The Telegraph focuses on Suella Braverman's warning that the party is heading for electoral oblivion. And the Daily Mail has this question: will the Tories ever give up fighting each other and start fighting Labour? Sorry for your loss. The Metro reporting on Boris Johnson's apology to families during his appearance today at the COVID inquiry. But the Mirror writes, the dead can't hear your apologies, condemning his words. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them. Kevin Maguire and Ali Miraj are here. Robert Jenrick dominating a number of the newspapers. In fact, we've got the very latest pictures of him arriving home. Let's take a look.
It's been quite a day for you, hasn't it?
Thanks. Nice to see you. Have a good evening.
Why did you resign, sir?
Robert, just one this way. All right. Nice to see you all. Thanks very much.
Are you convinced that Mr Cleverly's plan won't work? Do you think the Prime Minister will be able to stop the boats, Mr Jenrick?
So why did he quit, Ali? You pick this up then.
Well, he quit ostensibly because he's saying that the Prime Minister is not going far enough. He wants to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. That's what he wants the Prime Minister to do, because he's saying that this is a triumph of hope over, I think his words were hope over... what was he saying? Hope over experience. That's what he's basically saying, because he believes that this is again going to get caught up in the courts yet again, and this is going to be a failure for the Conservative Party. So he wants the Prime Minister to be a lot tougher. He wants him to come out of the European Convention on Human Rights. And the Prime Minister's argument is, well, the Rwandan government won't allow this because if we actually pull out of this convention, they will feel that we're breaking international law and it will not be acceptable. Now, Jenrick clearly is an ambitious individual. We have to wait and see. I mean, he might be plotting a leadership bid. We don't know. But what this shows is that the Tory party, I know it's pantomime season, but the Tory party has become a bit of a Christmas cracker joke at the moment. I mean, it's a complete disaster. They're all at each other's throats. You've got Suella Braverman in Parliament saying that they're facing electoral oblivion, which they probably already know, which is why they don't care anymore. But while the Prime Minister is going up in front of the 1922 committee, banging the table, saying unite or die. And by the way, the last person who said that was Ian Duncan Smith in 2002, and that didn't end well. This is looking really bleak, quite honestly.
OK, so the question is, how long can Rishi Sunak hold on to whatever authority he's got left? Or does this really not undermine him that much?
Yeah.
It's one minister.
I'm not sure it's bleak, actually. I mean, look, this is a pantomime, isn't it? I mean,
You're smiling because of your politics.
It is, but it is the disintegration of a UK government after 13 and a half years in power, and bits of it are falling off all the time. And I wondered what, if anything, politically this morning could knock Boris Johnson off the front page and the top of the news bulletins. And then, hey, along comes Jenrick, who is hugely ambitious. And I was told earlier in the week, he knows they're going to lose after the election. He'll run for the leadership, not expecting to win, I was told, but he can get enough votes to then secure a very senior position afterwards. But no, it's appalling for if you're Sunak. You just look incredibly isolated. Your authority is gone. Yvette Cooper had a barnstormer, the Labour shadow, in the in the House of Commons, because you could say it's only the Rwandan government now, a repressive government that is stopping you breaking international law. And it's not going to take many, 24 Tory MPs
well, that's right.
can stop this bill, because they will think it's not going far enough, while all the opposition parties, Labour, SNP, Liberal Democrat, the Green, and so on, they vote against it because they think it's going too far.
But you see, before Jenrick even resigned, Jenrick's obviously taking the headlines this evening, and we're all talking about Jenrick. Earlier in the day, when this bill was actually announced that this was going to come out, it says on the front of the bill that this may breach European Convention of Human Rights, but we're going to continue anyway. And you've got people like Lord Sumption coming out, right? Former Supreme Court Justice, basically saying that this is unheard of. The fact that the government, even under its existing plan, which was not enough for Jenrick, saying that even under this existing plan, what they're instructing the courts to do is just to believe that everything's going to be all right on the night, not to have any judicial challenge whatsoever. Now, I thought we were living in a democracy here where you have an executive, a legislature and a judiciary that all hold each other to account. This is what this is basically saying is we, the executive, are going to get this passed in Parliament by the legislature, and the judiciary will not count.
But it's not the first time, because the Illegal Migration Bill, or Act now, as it was called, Suella Braverman, then Home Secretary, on the front said she couldn't say that was legal. I mean, look, for a party, the Conservative Party, that would always present itself as the party of law and order, it's kind of lawlessness and disorder right across the piece. And the Guardian is absolutely right there. They are in turmoil.
Well, they're divided, aren't they?
Yeah, the Times and the Telegraph are in. Let's see those as we talk, actually. You're right. The Safety of Rwanda, Asylum and Immigration Bill, as it's called, states that it is the judgment of Parliament that the Republic of Rwanda is a safe country. The bill says that every decision maker, specifically mentioning the courts, as you said, must conclusively treat the Republic of Rwanda as a safe country. So if you say it's safe, it's safe.
Well, exactly. You could have a bill saying Ali's an England centre forward or a fantastic cricketer. Absolutely. It doesn't make it.
Challenge that.
It doesn't make it the case. You can't.
Oh, it does now. In 2023, Britain, it does. But the thing is, the Tory party is effectively at war. This is the new Brexit now. I thought we'd seen off the right of the Tory party. I thought they'd actually won. They got Brexit.
They won over net zero as well.
Well, they won over net zero. They got Brexit done. Now you've got the net zero group, the ERG, the European Research Group. You've
Common
got
Sense Group.
Yes, this new Conservative
showing no
group,
common sense.
Right, and then you've got on the other side, you've got the One Nation Tories, who are led by Damien Green and others, who are very upset about all this.
106 of them, apparently.
Right, so you've got a complete division. This has now become the new Maastricht, the new Brexit debate within the Tory party. They just cannot stop fighting.
So if you go back to the Telegraph with the picture of Suella Braverman, one, who's leading this rebellion of the right? Is it her, or is it Jenrick? And has she turned him, because he was supposed to be a loyalist of Sunak? And secondly, is she right that actually the party faces oblivion if it does not fully stop the boats? Is it
does
that
anyway.
existential?
Yeah, but it can't stop the boats. This bill would not. Rwanda would not stop the boats.
But Rwanda is a deterrent. You can find other deterrents, can't you?
But if it's a few hundred people and you got 30,000 this year, it's not going to work. It just won't work. I think it's immoral. It's immoral and wrong. But it was intended to be a wedge issue, to drive a wedge between Labour and the Conservatives for electoral purposes. What it's done is it's driven a wedge now through the Conservative Party. It is completely backfired on them.
Look, I was supportive of trying to do something drastic with Rwanda. I was fully behind the government trying to take drastic action to stop people paying unscrupulous people, smugglers, to put themselves at risk and at harm's way in the Channel every year. We needed to be aggressive to get something done. But even I can realise that if it's gone into every court in the land, and you've now got the Supreme Court coming out with all sorts of issues only a few weeks ago, saying that, Rwanda's not a safe country, and all sorts of issues about refoulement, where you send people back to their country of origin, potentially to face persecution. Now what's happened? James Cleverly's gone out. He signed a new treaty with Rwanda, right, to say that they can't send people back. They're trying to put safeguards in, and they've just changed the law now. The problem with all this is that the party looks completely and utterly divided. It looks weak. It's become a complete joke. And frankly, this is not going to actually have any impact at all. You can't just say that this is the law when you have no recourse to judges.
I know, Ali, you were back in the day a candidate in happier days.
Absolutely.
I mean, you didn't get elected, but that wasn't your. It was the
and I believe we should control these things.
But you can see now. You say it looks a joke, utterly divided. It is a joke. It is utterly divided. It doesn't just look. It is just now a fact, and it is absolutely astonishing the way what I thought was a really clever wheeze. I thought it was a gimmick. I thought it was always very underhand and dirty. But it is now just backfired.
But surely it can't be that much of a joke, Kevin, in the sense that they're not going to replace Sunak with the fourth Prime Minister. I mean, I did think about buying a lettuce on the way here to see how long the lettuce might outlive Sunak. But come on, it's not going to happen.
No,
surely.
I think it's unlikely. But Labour's had 6 Prime Ministers in history. The Conservatives have had 5 in, 7 years? And you wonder if they're now going to get a 6th next year. So that would be 6 in 8 years as against Labour's 6 in history.
Wow.
I mean, it is.
That's a good factoid. I like that one, I have to say.
It is astonishing.
So, I mean, as you can see, it's leading a number of the newspapers. What was booted off was the man at the top there, Boris Johnson. Sorry, but not sorry. We're still talking about the Conservative Party and, how they behave in politics, aren't we? Anyway, lots of coverage of Boris Johnson. A controlled appearance, people have said, for him, turning up several hours before it started. Presumably to avoid the crowds, the people who've lost family members. How do you think he did, Kevin, first of all?
He wasn't tetchy, was he? I thought he had the stuffing knocked out of him. He was like a punch-drunk boxer. And you're quite right. He controlled his temper. He had the odd clash, but that's perfectly legitimate in this. But I don't think he made it any worse for himself, but I don't think he made it any better. And the mirror's stuck with COVID rather than going with Jenrick, because a lot of people are still very angry and furious about COVID. And those signs, the dead can't hear your apologies. I think that is true.
That was the silent message held up, wasn't it, by 4 women and the...
He said sorry at the beginning, but he didn't really know what he was saying sorry for. I mean, it didn't feel very sincere.
But he should have twigged,
He did say that.
He didn't realise the pandemic was serious. I think even the chair rolled her eyes at that point. But I don't understand, many people listening do not understand why they didn't twig. China was building a mass hospital, really early on in this. The mayor of Bergamo was begging correspondent Stuart Ramsey to get the UK to listen.
Because he was obsessed with Brexit. He was absolutely obsessed with that. And also at that time, he was finalising his divorce and preparing to get married again.
Well, there was a lot said about the 5 Cobra meetings at the start. He did accept and he did admit that he didn't twig it early, and he said it was... it was totally an unexpected event. It was a once-in-a-100-year event. He thought it would be like SARS or swine flu or something, and it was of a different magnitude. So I think he was quite open about that particular thing. I also think he obviously lamented all the deaths. He got quite emotional at one point during the testimony as well. And let's remember that he himself nearly died. I mean, he was in intensive care for a period of time. So it obviously took a personal toll, and I think some of that was coming out today. But clearly some of the families there were walking out. They were very angry, and understandably so. And many of them feel that he still hasn't really understood the magnitude of that decision not to lock down early.
Yeah, and just very quickly, he was challenged, wasn't he, about his own commitment to the idea of lockdown or non-pharmaceutical interventions. And he said, no, I was asking about the downsides, about the economic hit, and I'd have been wrong if I hadn't been asking that question.
Yes.
But he was pushed on this idea that he didn't really believe in, controlling the public in this way.
No, I think that's right. And if you're the Prime Minister, you want to question everything, but you have to reach decisions, and you want to get the decisions correctly. Now, he wasn't always well advised by the scientists. They won't all go on the same way. We've got to acknowledge that. But the buck stops at the top. And there's no doubt he made fundamental errors that resulted in the needless loss of life.
Yeah, OK, well, the Tories certainly dominating the newspapers. There are other stories too, including Israel's offensive in southern Gaza and the IDF's claim that it is closing in on Hamas's leader. We will talk more about that in just a moment.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Wall Street! High Street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed a remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
It's easy to go to politics But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians.
You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations here.
What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me now, the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kev Maguire, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Welcome back to both of you. So let's go to the papers and talk about the latest situation with Gaza. The United Nations, clearly with multiple warnings. But here, Israeli forces, Hamas fighting house to house, according to The Guardian, and closing in on Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader. To be fair, they've done this, they said before, on the 9th of November in Gaza City. But here we are, different locations, same man, the man they want, of course.
I'd be very surprised if he sat at home waiting for them to come calling. He probably moves around with the rest, but the Guardian's got the story on the front. It's gone into many inside pages, and yet people are still dying in huge numbers, estimated 1,700 since the breakdown of the ceasefire on last Friday. But as the Israelis think they're closing in on him, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary-General of the UN, for the first time in his 6 years, has triggered what's called Article 99, which gets the Security Council to look at the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
And this is after one of their aid centres was raided as well.
Yep.
They said that shows civil order.
Which, of course, has happened before. It's happened again. Yeah. There's fuel not going in.
The desperation, some might say, or even they are saying.
And people are being told to move around by the Israelis. Often you don't know where you're going. Your mobile phone doesn't work, so you can't use QR codes. And it's just absolutely horrific. What happened on October the 7th when Hamas slaughtered, murdered, raped Israelis was barbaric. But what's happening now is barbaric too in Gaza. As so many innocent civilians, including children and women, are killed by the Israeli assault in pursuit of Hamas.
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because so many people have moved south. It's a very overcrowded area. You know, it was always one of the most densely populated parts of the world. Southern Gaza now really so. And the safe zones, the designated safe zones that Israelis are trying to send people to, there's not enough there to look after people for the weeks and months it might take for them to live there.
No, there really isn't. And this is a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in front of our eyes. You now have the Hamas health ministry figures of 16,000, and I know that people take that with a health warning, but you can see with your own eyes that thousands of people are dying.
The suggestion I heard today was 7,000 are missing on top of that as well.
And look, I was one of the people who, after that horrendous attack by Hamas on Israel on October the 7th, believed that Israel does have a right to defend itself. Of course it does.
Yep.
But what you're now seeing is that this is actually not helping Israel's case at all. In fact, the families and Israeli hostages themselves who've been released, some of them were actually shouting at Benjamin Netanyahu in a private meeting saying, what on earth are you doing? We're not going to be sacrificing our friends and family for the sake of your political future, because he's facing trial in his own country. He's really in a hole, Benjamin Netanyahu. And at the moment, the danger is for the Israelis that he drags Israel down with himself to try and save himself. And this is exactly the kind of feedback he's getting from some of the hostages themselves who want to be reunited with their loved ones. They want him to strike a deal with Hamas to get the remaining 240 of the 240 people back. And it's looking absolutely dire. And you've got Antonio Guterres saying it's a complete breakdown in the humanitarian system. I mean, there's like a lawlessness going to break out. People are desperate for stuff. And I understand the Israelis want to wipe out Hamas, but that's another issue, because they need to think, and this is what Biden told them from the start, don't be consumed by rage. This is what happened in Afghanistan when the Taliban was back in power 20 years after the conflict started. What is the end game here? What is the solution?
And the creation of Islamic State in Iraq and Syria.
OK.
Part by the West.
Just one final story, which I know you wanted to talk about, which was, modern life meets drug use. This is cannabis dealers using QR stickers on street corners to sell their wares. You've got 10 seconds.
I know, just use your phone and order it. It's happening in London, happening in Worcester. And, of course, condemn it. But isn't it great? Don't the cops just go along, do it, and then you'll immediately,
track down where they are?
Yeah, I would have thought it could absolutely backfire on me. Although it's basically been decriminalised.
Exactly, I was going to say.
And probably rightly so.
OK, we have no time to discuss that further, the rights and wrongs of that. Ali Miraj, Kevin Maguire, thank you both very much indeed. We will see you for the 11, of course. Here's the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So the rest of the week looks more unsettled, less cold, heavy rain keeping the risk of localised flooding. Quite a windy but frost-free start tomorrow. Outbreaks of rain over much of Britain. Some snow on the Scottish peaks. Ireland, Northern Ireland, drier, if rather murky, but prolonged rain will be moving into the west, as you can see. So the morning largely overcast, windy, patchy rain over the UK, turning heavy and prolonged from the west, although southeast England looks like staying mainly dry in the morning.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Five of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.